So I'm turning on the recording. Are you ready? It's 5 o'clock. So we good?
All
Okay.
good.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and mute all. So you
We
all will be
unmuted.
muted. You're going to be muted now. And just remember to go, you can go ahead and unmute yourselves now. I just want to hit mute all so everybody else gets muted. And I'm going to disable the waiting room and let folks in. And here they come. So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. Welcome. We have a lot of people who need to get logged in this evening. So while we let them get logged in, I'm just going to run through some Zoom best practices with you to help you have a really great time this evening. So welcome, and just sit back while I talk you through some Zoom best practices. So the very first one is that you should be muted. And we ask that you keep yourself muted throughout this entire presentation tonight. If you somehow manage to unmute yourself, please go to your taskbar at the top or the bottom of your screen. Go all the way to the left. There's a little microphone that says mute, and that is how you get yourself muted again. And the reason we ask you to mute yourself is that it cuts down on all that background noise that can affect the overall quality, audio quality for everyone. So please keep yourself muted. I'm going to be taking down this PowerPoint in just a couple of minutes, and when I do, I would recommend that you switch to what's called speaker view. So that is probably at the top of your screen. It might say view, it might say speaker view or gallery view, but you want to switch to speaker view so that whoever is talking is going to appear nice and big at the bottom of your screen, and all the little video feeds will kind of go up into a ribbon on the top and not get so much in the way. So when we're done with this, you'll want to switch to speaker view. So next up, I'd like you to find your chat, which is located on your taskbar. It's in the middle of the screen. It says chat. It's got a little speech bubble above it. If you click on that, a window will open. You can kind of grab that with your cursor and move it out of your way. And the chat is how we communicate with one another today. So if you have a question or a comment, we ask that you pop that into the chat. We're going to be keeping an eye on it, and that's how we'll know what questions and comments to make. I'm going to put something in the chat right now, and I will go over that with you in just a second, but I want you to see what the chat looks like. So a couple things about today's presentation. One, it is being recorded. And the other is that closed captioning is available. So you have to have closed captioning enabled on your Zoom account. As long as it is enabled on your Zoom account, you can go to your taskbar. Kind of over on the right-hand side, it says closed caption with a little arrow pointing up. You just click on that, a menu comes up, and you want to click on show subtitles. So you can watch this via closed caption. We invite you to support today's author by purchasing a copy of her book, and we would love for you to purchase it from our local independent bookstore, Browseabout Books in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. Browseabout is our partner in these virtual author events, and they are what makes these free events possible. So if you could support them, that would be wonderful. The link to the book, to purchase the book, is in the chat. And I'd also like to point out that today's interviewer also has books, many books available, and you can purchase those through Browseabout as well, and that link is in the chat. And all of the links that are in the chat are going to be sent out afterwards in a follow-up email. So don't worry too much about getting them all down today. You'll have a chance later on. If you would like to borrow a copy of the book through the Delaware Library System, you can do that, and that link is in the chat, not only for today's book, but also for our interviewers' books. So those two links are in the chat if you would like to borrow a copy. It sounds like a couple of people have managed to unmute themselves, so please keep yourselves muted. That would be great. Just go to your taskbar and mute yourself. Lewis Public Library offers a number of virtual events. You can always go to our website. The link is in the chat just to check out what we have coming up. And we partner with Browseabout Books on a number of virtual author events, and we are booking more every single day. I think I have 2 in my inbox right now I have to book. So we invite you to go to the link in the chat and check out what authors will be coming up. So thank you for joining us today. I'll go ahead and take down this screen share. Now would be a great time to switch to speaker view, again in the upper right-hand corner if you want to switch to speaker view. My name is Rebecca Lowe. I'm the Adult Program Coordinator with the Lewis Public Library. Thank you for joining us today. I'd like to introduce both our author and our interviewer today. Sadeqa Johnson is the award-winning author of 4 novels. Her accolades include the National Book Club Award, the Phyllis Wheatley Book Award, and the USA Best Book Award for Best Fiction. She is a Kimbley Fellow, a former board member of the James River Writers, and a tall poppy writer. Originally from Philadelphia, go Eagles, she currently lives near Richmond, Virginia with her husband and 3 children. Our interviewer is Kate Quinn, and she is a New York Times and US Today best-selling author of historical fiction. A native of Southern California, she attended Boston University, where she earned a bachelor's and master's degree in classical voice, which I find fascinating. She has written 4 novels in the Empress of Rome saga and 2 books in the Italian Renaissance before turning to the 20th century with the Alice Network, The Huntress, and The Rose Code. And she has a new book coming out as well. Kate and her husband now live in San Diego with 3 rescue dogs. So welcome to both of you, and thank you for joining us, and the floor is yours. Thanks.
Hey, thank you for that great introduction. And can I be the first to, first of all, congratulate Sadeqa on this wonderful launch.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
No, now, will it bother you if I just gush about the book for a little bit? Because I think the audience probably wants to hear a little something about it before we dive into like the background behind it. So can I gush a little?
Gush away, Kate. Gush away.
Okay, settle in. It is a great book. It is, I devoured this. I had it pre-ordered and I was, I definitely cried more than once. To give you the sort of précis of what this book is about, a yellow wife follows Phoebe, who is a young enslaved woman on a plantation who has led, if not a privileged life, I would not ever apply the word privilege to someone who is enslaved. Her life is at least somewhat easier than a great many of the other people who are owned on the plantation. Partly in due to her mother's status as, sort of the healer of the plantation, partly due to having been favored by the family. The master's sister made her a particular pet and educated her and gave her quite a few things that growing up that a lot of the other enslaved people did not have. She, most of all, in that was a promise that she would be awarded her freedom at 18. But this particular promise does not come to pass, and it's not a spoiler. It's pretty much right there in the that's pretty much right there in the cover copy. Phoebe finds herself instead sold to the infamous Devil's Half Acre, which is a slave jail in Virginia and a terrible, terrible place. And soon she is forced to survive, to negotiate survival, not just for herself, but for her children. And this is really the crux of the book, is how this woman learns to negotiate the most terrible choice that any human being, I think, can be asked. It can be can be faced with, and that's when you're forcing a woman to choose between her freedom and her children. And this is something that I found absolutely riveting. I found educational. I found heartbreaking, and I really can't wait for you to dive into this book as well. We are going to be talking about the book ourselves first, and we have some great ideas and some great topics about what lies behind the writing of it and the research. But please put your comments in the chat as well, and at the end we will have plenty of time for questions. I'll also be keeping an eye on that so that I can weave in some if they appear to be dovetailing with our conversation. So anyway, gushing out of the way, what is the inspiration behind Yellow Wife, first of all?
Well, first of all, that was such a great gush. Sometimes it is really difficult for me to kind of, like, I wrote the book, I lived the book for 3 years, but sometimes when people say, what is the book about? This happens in my head. So that was amazing. So thank you so much for that beautiful setup. I was a contemporary fiction writer. My first 3 novels were all contemporary fiction. And my thought was that I was going to stay in that lane and I was going to write another contemporary fiction novel. We moved to the Richmond area in 2015. And in 2016, we had some friends come down from New Jersey to visit, and they had children. And we were just looking for an activity that we could do with the family, take them out, get some fresh air. And someone suggested that we take a walk on the Richmond Slave Trail. Being new to town, it wasn't something we had done. And so, when you first get to a place, you do all those touristy things. So we decided it was a great idea. We packed up the kids, we packed up our friends, and we drove downtown. The Richmond Slave Trail is along the James River. There's 17 markers along the river, and it tells different portions of the history of slaves being brought to Richmond, brought to Virginia. And we had the children read each marker because we wanted to kind of get them involved. And they got to the marker about the Lumpkins jail. And what I remember was that they described the Lumpkins jail as a notorious punishing center for slaves. Over the course of like 10 or 15 years, over 200,000 slaves had passed through this jail. And it was owned by Robert Lumpkin, who they called the bully trader, because he was such an evil man. And, slaves, people sent their slaves to be punished at this jail, but also was a place for trading. And it said that he was married to Mary Lumpkin, who was a Black woman, and they had 5 children together. So the first thing that kind of pricked my interest was, wait, how was he married to a Black woman? Because I knew in the 1800s, interracial relationships, interracial marriage was illegal. So that was the first thing that I thought about. The second thing was that he was such a contradiction. On the one hand, he was the bully trader and he was, this mean, evil guy, but it said that he treated Mary and their children with love and compassion. And so that contradiction also kind of made me pay attention. I started to think about what it was like for Mary being with him. Was it a choice of just, did she love him? Was it for survival? Like, what was going on in her mind? What, she didn't really have a lot of choices, but how did she survive this relationship with him? And then as a mother myself, I have 3 children. What was it like raising these 5 kids on a half acre? And if you think about what happened on this half acre, there was a tavern that he used to entertain his clients, and that's where he did a lot of the sales. There was the jail that they said smelled worse than anything you've ever imagined. And this is where the punishing happened. There was the house, and there were other small little outhouses on this property. And so I kept thinking, how is all this possible happening in the same place? So that was really the nucleus of the story kind of starting to germinate for me. And that's kind of where it was born.
So I'm glad you have that picture of that gorgeous cover behind you so that we can look at that right as we're discussing this book. I literally was in a Facebook book group, and we were talking about covers, and my inner marketing, guru came out of her cave with a squeal when I saw that cover, because that to me does everything that a cover should do. It's eye-catching, it's beautiful, it tells you what the book is going to be about. And, the title is part of that, because a cover package, it's about the image, it's about the subtitles, but it's also about what the title says. All these things, create, ideally a big impression that says, buy me. So how did you come up with the title? Because, the title itself, I would say is part of that package perfection, because it's so historically freighted with meaning. And it also gives you this fantastic image too. So how did you come up with something so perfect?
So when I was doing my research, I remember I was just literally on Google, and I found a portion of Robert Lumpkin's will. And in his will, he said something similar, and I'm not quoting it, but basically to the idea, I leave all of my fortune and my real estate to my yellow wife, meaning Mary Lumpkin, because she was mulatto and he considered her his wife. And then he left some other things to his Black concubine, because obviously, of course, during that time, he had more than one woman. And so he left the rest to his Black concubine. And I thought, yellow wife, that is a really good way to describe her. And I wrote the title down. I used it as my working title, but I'm always very open, Kate, that when it gets to my agent, it gets to my editor, if the publishing house is not on board, I'm usually pretty open that I would change the title, but it stuck. Everybody was on board, and they loved it. So Yellow Wife it is.
We've got my dogs barking in the background, and I'm sorry about that, but I probably should have issued my usual disclaimer that, dogs may interrupt at any point. This is their office. I just happen to work in it. Anyway, that aside, my other question that I really wondered, hearing your background, is that you've written contemporary novels and then switched to historical fiction. So how has that switch been for you?
Yeah, it wasn't anything I intended. I discovered this story by accident. And it was something that I was really afraid of. I've read historical fiction since I was a young girl. I remember reading Jubilee by Margaret Walker. I read Winch and The Kitchen House by Kathleen Grisham. but it wasn't anything that I thought I
And oh
was.
my God, I love Wench. Oh,
That was such a great book, right? Oh my
yeah,
goodness.
Dr. Dolan Perkins. She just like reached in there, like grabbed my spine and just like yanked it out and like tore it in a knot. Just real casual, like. Sorry, excuse me, folks. And I heard her speak at the HNS conference, and my God, she was so inspirational. Anyway, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no, I feel the same way. That's actually a book that I've read twice, so I know exactly how you feel. So I've always been drawn to those type of stories. I just didn't know that I had it in me to write it. And I remember when I was really starting to feel like this is something I could do, I had a friend come over, and she's an interior decorator, so we share like that kind of artist thing going on. And she's like, "What are you writing next?" And I'm like, "I don't know, but I'm telling her about this story and how it's making me feel, but how afraid I am." And she said to me, "Sadeqa, the thing that makes you the most afraid is the thing you're supposed to do next." And so it was like that opened the gate for me to say, just give it a chance. And I was reading a book by Diane McKinney Whetstone called Lazaretto. And that took place in Philadelphia around the time that Abraham Lincoln had died. And I thought, okay, if she can do it, I'm kind of following the way she wrote the story. Because, as writers, we study other writers. And I said, if she can do it, I could at least give it a try. So the transition for me, really, it was seeped in the research. I went to a lot of plantations. I tried to keep my concentration in Richmond because slavery in Richmond is going to be different than in South Carolina and New Orleans. Like all those places are going to bring a different type of flavor. So I tried to keep my research in Virginia as much as possible. I grabbed my 2 young daughters and made them my research assistants. I spent a lot of time in the Library of Virginia, kind of combing through periodicals and reading books. The biggest thing I would say that really helped me to seep into the story was reading slave narratives, reading books by people who were actually enslaved. It helped with the language. It helped put me in that place. And it really helped the story feel a lot more authentic.
So how was, dovetailing into the research, the next question really seems obvious, which is how was the research for you? And did you find out anything in particular that surprised you?
Yeah, the research was a lot of fun. I kept falling down rabbit holes.
Occupational hazard.
I mean, you probably can relate to that as a historical fiction writer. It's like you're looking at one thing and then you just turn just a teeny bit and you're off to the races in another direction. And you it's almost like a puppy. You got to bring it back and say, nope, this is the story. Nope, this is the story. So I found myself doing that a lot. I was jumping down rabbit holes in different directions. But I really enjoyed the research. I would say 2 things that I was really surprised about in my research. One was that enslaved people in the Richmond area were able to go out and hire themselves out. Whenever I think of people who were enslaved, I see them on a plantation with, just kind of being stuck in one place. But I found in my research that some of the masters would allow them to go into town and hire themselves out for a few days and bring the money back to them. It was another way for their masters to make money. Another thing that I did not know was that this whole world existed. And so Phoebe Dolores Brown is based off of the inspired after Mary Lumpkins. There wasn't a whole lot of information that I found on her. So I took what I could, and most of it is my imagination and just me kind of staring out the window and picturing, what I thought her life was like. But when I looked at women who were like her, I realized that there were a lot of women who were married to these jailers. And what it was like in Richmond at that time was that no white man who had a respectable daughter or came from a respectable business would marry his daughter to a jailer or a traitor. They were considered the pariahs of the city, even though slavery was, what was going on at that time. It still was a dirty business. And so they wouldn't marry their daughters to these men. And so there were a bunch of men like Robert Lumpkin, like Reuben LaPierre in my story, who had mulatto wives because for them, that was the next best thing. So they had this whole other level of society with these men and these mulatto wives. So those were 2 really interesting facts that I didn't know that I discovered in my research.
So we have a couple questions about some of your sources here. I think we may as well dive in, even though we're a little bit pre-question time. But what books would you recommend, since you mentioned that you actually read enslaved words and narratives? Are there any that you can, list that people might want to look up for themselves?
Sure. And there's a whole section in the back of Yellow Wife in the author's notes where I list all of my sources. Two books that come to mind was The Incident and Life of a Slave Girl by Harriet Jacob, which I just found riveting. That was one of the first books that I dived into. And then there was a second book. Well, I also read A Known World by Edward P. Jones, which was a whole different look. It was fiction, but it was a whole different look at what it was like for slavery, because in that book, there were Black people who owned slaves, which that was something I had not known. So that was interesting. And then there was another book by an enslaved man. His name was Charles Ball. And he also had a book. I can't remember the name, but it is listed in the back of Yellow Wife. But his stories and his quest for freedom really inspired a lot of the scenes in Yellow Wife.
Yeah, I would hold up my copy of the book and type in from the last page into the chat, but I lent it to my grandmother, and there's no way I'm prying it out of her hands in the next week. So yeah, you're gonna have to buy your own copy and look at the back page. Were you able to meet a question from Christine? Were you able to meet any of the descendants of any of the people who inspired the story?
No, I wasn't. But one, I did get to speak to a historian who works at Virginia Union University. So what happens in real life, what happens to the Lumpkins jail is that Mary Lumpkins, she inherits the property from Robert Lumpkins, and she then leases it out to Nathaniel Culver, who is a Baptist minister who comes to Richmond to teach the free Black men how to read and how to teach them. It was like a Bible school for them. It then turns into the University of Virginia Union, which is one of the first historical Black colleges in the country, as well as in Virginia. And so it does have a new life. And so I was able to speak to a historian at the college who was very familiar with that time period. And so he was really good about helping me pick out little details and things that needed to happen. Like I remember him telling me that they had to clean like the bottom of their shoes because there was like always some kind of muck or something on them. There was little small things that he told me that I was able to incorporate into the story.
So you've talked about Mary Lumpkin, who was your inspiration for Phoebe, who's your heroine. Was there anything else you really about her in particular as far as inspiration goes?
It was, I mean, the biggest thing was, how did she survive? I mean, that was always on my mind, is how did she survive? And so when I crafted the character of Phoebe Dolores Brown in Yellow Wife, that was always in the back of my head. You know, I didn't know where she came from. When I found Mary Lumpkin, it said that she had arrived at the jail as a young girl. But when I wrote Phoebe Dolores Brown, I thought it was important for me to put her on a plantation, so that you could see this life that she had prior to her ending up at the jail. So I had to use a lot of imagination. And I also wanted to pay homage to other slaves that I found their stories. And so all of the names in the book were either on slave ledgers that I was able to find, on slave ledgers at plantations. I Googled a bunch of slave ledgers, so I was able to find them. And also one of my cousins did our family tree, and it went all the way back to the 1700s. And so I went and I picked some names from there, because I felt like in writing this story, you know, I really felt like this book chose me. It was like the ancestors were waiting for me to come at that moment, at that time. So much so that when we were on the Richmond slave trail, towards the end of the trail, there was the spot of where the Lumpkins jail had been. And then right next to it, it was the African burial ground. Because what happened to these people who were in the jail, there was no ceremony. They waited for the bodies to kind of pile up, and then they just threw them in the ground. And so Richmond has preserved this area. And when my family and I were there, it was like this energy that we felt, you know, it was so strong that the children, they just started kind of dancing. And my friend kind of pretended like he was playing the African drums, and it was this synergy, it was this energy. And I felt like they were like, Sadeqa, you finally came, you know, we want you to tell our story. And so it was important for me to put as much of that into Yellow Wife as possible and to honor as many souls as I could.
So we have a couple questions that are somewhat similar. One from Pamela, which was, were there other kinds of slave jails? And one from Sharon, which is that you mentioned other jailers. So how many jails were there in the Richmond area at that time?
There were a few, and there's a scene in the book when you read Yellow Wife. There's a scene in the book where they all kind of get together. There are a couple of couples that get together, and some of that is based on actual characters that I was able to find in my research. So
That was like, I remember that scene in the book. That was like the world's most surreal double date scene.
Yeah.
When all these jailers get together and like all their wives are just sort of eyeing each other. And I was just like, oh my God, this is so horrendous on so many levels. But at the same point, it's like at least this poor girl, this heroine Phoebe, finally has some women she can look at and be like, can you please guide me in this new life I found myself in?
Yeah. And it's funny you should say that, because even back when Phoebe was on the plantation, the mistress of the plantation, the master's wife, his name was Delphina. And, you know, she was also very lonely. You know, she was very lonely. She says in the book that, you know, she can't remember the last time she saw another white woman. And I did a lot of research in what it was like for women who ran these plantations. You know, we look at their lives as being just glamorous, but really it was a hard story for everyone. You know, for all involved, it was a hard time. And so I really wanted to make her character as three-dimensional as possible as well.
So we have a question from Lisa, and it's about how writers are researching during the pandemic when you're limited to not traveling or, you know, and not actually going places. And then also I'm thinking too, it's like, just for something fun, did you have any particular rituals that you sort of indulged in when you were writing, you know, Yellow Wife every day?
So as far as research, luckily for me, Yellow Wife was placed with Simon & Schuster in 2019. So I had already done all of my research. So I had a lot of freedom to go out and touch and feel and smell everything that I needed to in order to write that book. I am working on a second historical fiction that is separate from Yellow Wife. It's a completely different story that I'm kind of fooling around with. And so far, I've only done a couple of Google searches. I haven't gone to a library. I haven't gone back to the city or walked around and any of that. So hopefully that will change when I get a little deeper into the story and I need a little bit more feel it, see it, touch it. You know, with the vaccine, hopefully I'll be back out in the research world soon. But a fun thing that I do writing is I listen to music. So Phoebe Dolores Brown, she plays piano. And I listened to a lot of piano players during that time. And I'm going to totally butcher his name. I should have it like worked out at this point, but Chopin, you know, the piano player. So I listened to him kind of on repeat. Because it made me feel like I was in her world. His music was in the 1800s. Phoebe was in the 1800s. And so it brought me into that time period. There are a few scenes that happen at a church. And so I was able to find some 1800 Negro spirituals that was kind of, I think it was either at the Library of Congress or, you know, I kind of just Googled it and it came up, but it sounded as if they were sung at that time. And there were only small snippets, but I would play it on repeat when I was writing those scenes in the church so that I could feel that energy through my body of what it was like for them to be in the church and hear that music at that time. And some of those lyrics find their way throughout the story.
Oh, that's wonderful to hear. I'm another one who loves music for when I'm writing, so I always love hearing people's playlists. Anyway, sorry I had to switch. I have afternoon sun like moving in the most inconvenient pattern across my wall, so I was trying to cut down on the glare so I could actually see what the facial expressions are.
You look fantastic, Kate.
We have a question about what are the titles of the books referenced by the two of us. One was Wench by Dolan Perkins Valdez. What was the other one that you had mentioned? I think it was the novels that we.
The Known World by Edward P. Jones.
Okay, great. So that was
also my other favorites were Jubilee by Margaret Walker And oh, I said Lazzarato by Diane McKinney Whetstone. And of course,
Okay.
Kathleen Grisham, you know, she is amazing. Kitchen House changed my life. So The Kitchen House by Kathleen Grisham is another one if you're interested in that time period.
So what plantations did you actually visit? That was another question I had further up. I'm not sure who asked it. Sorry for if you're watching, but I did want to get to it.
So in Virginia, I was able to go to the Burrow Plantation, which was the home of Booker T. Washington, which was one that I didn't plan. I happened to just be driving through Virginia, and I was on my way to a book event, and I saw a sign that said historical site. So I pulled over, and it was a good thing that I did, because at the beginning of Yellow Wife, there's a bell that rings in the story. And that bell was inspired by the bell that I found on the Burrow Plantation when I stopped to go visit. I also used pictures from the smokehouse from this plantation, and just walking around and finding out the story of Booker T. Washington. That was another book that I read as well, but just kind of walking around and feeling that energy helped. There was another plantation here called the Shirley Plantation that we had gone to. And there's a really good one at the very bottom of Virginia, almost close to the North Carolina border, called the Presswood Plantation. And that one was actually recommended by Kathleen Grisham, because she had done, for the Kitchen House, she had done a bunch of research at that plantation. I think it's one of the last plantations in Virginia that still has the actual slave cabin on the grounds. And so I went and I visited that. And also the person who's in charge of the house is a humongous historian and knows like every nook and cranny about this house. And I could just sit and listen to him talk forever. I actually visited twice because he was just such a good storyteller.
So a question that I think that is always a fun one for people, since I know we have not just some fantastic readers here, but some aspiring writers as well. What advice would you give to an aspiring writer, a budding author, someone who's looking to, do what you have done?
My first bit of advice is always keep your butt in the chair. I find that that's the most difficult thing about writing, is like sitting down and writing. I don't know if you feel that way, but like just keeping your butt in the chair. And one of my early writing teachers said, listen, you don't have to quit your job to be a writer. Just start with 20 minutes before bed. If you commit to 20 minutes before bed every day for a week, next week is going to be 30 minutes before bed. And before you know it, it's an hour a day. And then you're writing 2 hours a day. So you really have to kind of make time for your writing. I find that for me, if I write out a schedule for the day and say, I'm going to wake up at this time, I'm going to write from this time to that time, I'm going to stop for breakfast at that time. Those are the days when I'm the most successful, and I keep my butt in the chair. What would be your advice, Kate?
Oh, well, the butt in chair thing is huge, I have to admit. I have sometimes been in a quandary whenever I've thought about, like, I'm not sure I could ever teach one of those workshops, for how to, be a writer, because I don't know how to make butt in chair stretch out to 40 minutes. So that's a huge one. The other one I would say is give yourself permission to be bad, because I hear a lot from writers online. You follow, like, on Twitter, #writing community. It's that kind of thing. And I see a lot from writers who are so intimidated by the fact that they're like, oh, this is just, it's going to be so terrible. It's so bad. I wrote like 3 lines and they're so horrible. I like wanted to crawl under a bed, and then they never actually get going. They're too intimidated by the fact that something is really rough when it comes out. And the fact is that everybody's first draft is bad. My first drafts are terrible. I know, as great as Yellow Wife is, your first draft is probably something you shudder to look back on.
Listen, I can go back and read my first drafts anymore. After once I get to the second draft, the first draft is done.
But it's just that. It's like, we have to give ourselves permission to be bad, because no one has to read the first draft. Just bear in mind, no one has to read it. Once you have it down, then you can make it better. And I think that bit of advice comes from Nora Roberts, which is, I can fix a bad page. I cannot fix a blank page. Mm-hmm. So the thing for people who are new at this, I think, is that it's okay that it's bad. Expect that it's going to be bad, and then you can make it better once it's out there. So just embracing, like, the other line, of course, would be, which comes from my husband who's in the military, is embrace the suck. It is going to suck. It's okay. Everybody does. So that's really the thing. I think that that's a fear that is hard to get over. But I think that if anyone's going to be a writer, you need to be able to get past that.
Yes, for sure. I echo all of that.
So when did you know that you wanted to write? That's a question from Jenna.
Yeah, so I started off actually as a big reader. I was the kid who went to the library on Monday. I checked out 7 books. I read a book a day. I was in 7th grade hiding my Sweet Valley High books behind my math book. I can't tell you a thing that happened in 7th grade math because I read through it. So it started for me for being a lover of reading, you know. From there, I wanted to be an actress. So I took a lot of acting classes. I was a theater major in college. And while in college, I started to write plays and poetry and screenplay writing. I was always kind of writing throughout my whole life. I was always journaling and that sort of thing, but I didn't call myself a writer probably until college. And it just really started with my first job was in publishing, actually. I worked at Scholastic Books as a publicist. And so my job was actually to promote authors, which was, you know, looking back, which was a really big blessing because now I have both sides of the table. I have knowledge about what happens behind the curtains in publishing. And then now I'm on this side of the table. So that was a really big blessing. But I started writing my first novel, Love in a Carry-On Bag, when I was in my 20s, my first job out of college. And I took writing classes. I wrote on the train. At some point, I moved to New Jersey. I moved out of New York, and I would write on the train. I would get to work at 4 o'clock every day. I would close my office. I would fix my edits on my work computer. I had to rush over to the printer because it was back when you had those shared printers, you know, where everybody shared the printer. I couldn't let anybody know that I was an aspiring novelist, you know, because I needed to be serious about my day job. And then I would take those papers and I would edit them on the way home. And that was really the beginning of getting that first book down, just being, you know, disciplined and having a bit of a routine.
There's a great line, a quote I love. I think it's Flaubert. It said something like, be orderly and in your work, in your habits, like a bourgeois, so that you can be violent and original in your work. And I think that's true. I mean, like I'm also like a total schedule wonk. You know, yeah, I want it written down. I need the routine, and it, you know, that's where the words come out. But actually, your experience in publishing really makes me dovetails nicely to the next question we have here, which is from Diane, and which is asking about what are your thoughts on the historic neglect of authors of color when it comes to book promotion and representation in publishing?
It's really difficult. I mean, to be honest, it was really hard for me to get a publishing deal to start, even though I had what I thought were connections because I had worked in publishing. So I thought, you know, I'm going to quit my job. I'm going to stay home with my son. I'm going to be, you know, a best-selling author. I have this book that I've been working on. I found an agent, which was easy because I had the publishing connections, but she wasn't able to get me a publishing deal. And one of the reasons was because at this time, Borders Books and Music, which was a bookstore that carried a lot of African-American authors, they closed down. So it was like, well, where do we put these books? You know, at that time, there was an exodus of African-Americans leaving publishing, whether they were let go or whether they left. And so it was like, well, who would edit these books? And so I tried to get into publishing on one of those down spirals for Black writers. And so I had to self-publish my first book myself and literally went up and down the East Coast and went to every book festival that I could find and literally I hand sold my book. I basically was selling the book out the back of my trunk was the beginning of me as an author. And, you know, I did it because I wanted this so badly. I tell people all the time, there are no overnight successes. Behind every New York Times bestseller, there is a story, you know? And so for me, it was really starting from the ground up and really building this book business for myself. And so right now we're kind of on an upswing in publishing where, you know, they are looking for books by writers of color, BIPOC authors, Black, Indigenous, and people of color. But I think it's always a cycle where they look for us and then they forget about us, and they look for us and then they forget about us. And so we're on the look for us now. And my hope is that it'll continue to, you know, go in the direction where we're trying to celebrate all voices, because we all make up the diaspora of this country. And so it takes all of these voices to really show, where we came from, who we are, and where we're going. And so my hope is that this will continue, and that, Yellow Wife will be a book that people will see that this is an American story. This is the history of America was built on the backs of slaves. That is the beginning of our time here in America. And we're all Americans. And so I hope that people will see this story as an American story and really be able to, there are some difficult scenes. It was a difficult time period, but it happened, right? It happened. Let us not forget, because we owe it to those. I stand on the backs of all those who came before me, and I'm proud of that.
And I think this is especially something that I'm hoping we will continue, and it won't just be a cyclical thing, that it will be a continuing thing to look for BIPOC authors for historical fiction in particular, because there is so much there are so many stories of the past. And let's be honest, a lot of historical fiction is focused on the white stories and the European centric stories. It's, it's like, and that's not even just about the fiction, it's also about the history, the way it's taught. I mean, if you look at history, it's like, it's the history of, you would think that like there's nothing outside of, Europe. And I love European history, but for God's sake, like we can move outside of that and let's find these other stories, because it's not like they aren't there and they need to be told. So I'm really hoping that it's not just going to be like a trend that's going to pop for a few years and then it's like everything will sink back down and no one's looking anymore. I really hope they keep looking and they keep publishing.
I do too. I mean, just living, in the Richmond area, when people found out about Yellow Wife and they knew that this was a Richmond story, I can't tell you how many people have come up to me and said, I never heard this. I lived in Richmond my whole life. Why wasn't this story? Why didn't we know about the Lumpkins jail in school? Why wasn't it a part of our history? And the fact is, it's not a part of the curriculum in schools. And so it's up to us writers to tell these stories, because they need to be told.
So we have a question from Heather saying, how exactly did you learn to write prose that sings? I love that, very true. And find the right voice for Phoebe. And also MFA or no MFA?
No MFA, and it's not because it was not for a lack of trying, okay? I applied to 2 schools in my 20s and they both turned me down. And when I finally got into the 3rd school that I was accepted to, I had just had a baby. So I was on my 3rd child, and I was living in New Jersey, and the school was in Brooklyn, and I would need to go twice a week. And I just couldn't figure out, because I was a stay-at-home mom, how I was going to do all those things. So when I finally got accepted, it just wouldn't fit into my life. So no MFA as of today, but things change. And I listen to, it's really hard to describe how I get the voices down, because I know some people say that when they're reading, the story kind of flows through their brain like a movie. And I would say that's exactly how the voice of the characters are for me. It's like, I have to embody them. And this may have something to do with my acting background. It's a little method acting on my part, but I literally have to feel them in my body and hear what they're saying. And I just take it down. I try and think of myself as kind of like the typist, the conduit. The story comes through me, and it's my job to get down exactly what I hear. And that's normally the voice. And so when I go back to edit it, I can feel when it's off and I need to change it. And the other trick is that I read the story out loud. So when I'm deeper in my edits, maybe draft 3 or draft 4, before I move from one chapter to the next, I read the whole chapter out loud, so that if something catches my tongue, something doesn't feel right, something doesn't feel authentic, I can hear it, and that way I can let it go.
I do that too, ironically. When I have a more complete draft, I read it aloud to my husband while he's cooking, and that's like the evening read. And then he'll, give me feedback. His feedback is always good, but it's the reading aloud really does help, doesn't it?
It does. And what would we do without our husbands? Because I do the same thing. I read the book as well. Sometimes I even catch my kids. If it's a scene that, it's not, because they're all like preteen and teenagers. Now it's a little bit easier. But if they come in my office at the right time, I'm like, have a seat real quick. Let me read something to you really fast. And they're like, okay.
So have your kids read your books? That's actually a question from Kathy over on the side.
My kids are not that impressed with me right now. I do not know what it is. I have asked my 17-year-old son, I said, when are you going to read Yellow Wife? He's like, I don't really have time now. Maybe I'll put it in my summer reading. I'm like, oh, okay. So we'll
Squeeze
see.
me into your busy schedule.
So hopefully it'll happen soon, but no, not yet. They haven't. And they were too young to read my contemporary fiction books when I was writing the first 3 books. But this one, I have a 17 and a 15-year-old, and I think that they are mature enough to handle it.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, it's some harsh reading, but on the other hand, it's history. It's history that you know. So I would say that for parents, if you have teenagers, 15 and 17 could read this book.
I agree.
You have your acting background, which you mentioned, and a question from Maureen is, from what I'm hearing, this book would make a fascinating movie. Second that. So what would be your thoughts on that? If, I don't know, Shonda Rhimes is like, I did Bridgerton, that was cool, but, I really need something new, and I'm thinking 10-hour miniseries. What would be your thoughts?
I would say Shonda Rhimes, bring it on. Okay. I already started to think about some characters in my head, So yes, I would be 100% on board. One of the things though I say is that I would like to, and this is because I have no experience at this at all. So in my ideal world, when Shonda does call, I would like to be like a script consultant, because I want to like be in the room as they're like shooting the ideas back and forth. But we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But yeah, bring it on. Bring it on.
I'm suddenly now hearing Hamilton, the room where it happens. Definitely. Yeah, I would want to be in that too. I think, the casting thing, I've read a very few authors who say that they don't ever think about, who they would cast in the book. And part of me thinks they're lying, but maybe they're not. I don't know. But most authors I know have done at least a little bit of that fantasy where you have it's like you know who you'd cast if somebody handed you the casting list. And yes, you do kind of know, maybe you've Googled like what dress you would be wearing to accept the Emmy for best limited series. Yeah. And, these are things you think about when you're
a little bit. Who would give you that little piece of jewelry around your neck, so that you can say, this is, such and such designer. Like, I think we have to think about that, because we spend so much time in our head creating these characters that there has to be a little bit of fantasy of how far they're going to go.
Now, who do you think would play Phoebe if you could pick anybody you wanted to?
So my favorite actress is Journey Smollett, but she has already played a Phoebe-like character in Underground. So if anybody's seen the miniseries Underground, she was the main character, but I just love her. I don't know if she would want to do a second slave story, but she definitely would be one who I like. There's another actress, I believe her name is Alexandra Shipp. She was in Shaft, one of the newer versions of Shaft. And I thought, oh, she might be kind of cute for Phoebe too. So, and also one of the actresses from Game of Thrones, I can't think of her name, but she had the big curly hair. She was with—
the one who played Missandei?
Was that her name? I don't know.
It was Dany's sort of handmaiden and counselor.
Yes.
She knew all the languages. Yes, she's
exactly.
She'd be very good.
She's the other one who I think about. The thing is, because Phoebe's 17 when the story opens, the actress would have to play really, really young, but probably be a little bit older, so that's for them to figure out the makeup and all of that. But those are the 3 that I think about.
That would be wonderful. Now, were you expecting, this is a question from Noor, are you expecting such a positive feedback for Yellow Wife?
I was. Yes.
I love that confidence, you wrote a damn good story and you expected people to tell you wrote a damn good story, and I'm glad they are.
Thank you. And yes, because I worked really, really hard on it. This is really the best that I have to offer at this moment. It is my absolute best. This is the best that I have to offer. So yes, I'm glad that other people are appreciating it.
So can you talk a little bit about, you say you're looking at another historical, will we jinx it if we talk about it a little bit? I'm sure people would love to know what's next.
Yeah, I mean, I can't give you too many details. I'm only on draft 2, but and draft one sucks, right? So it really was just me hacking through the woods trying to get the story down on paper in some form. It is the first time, well, my very first book I wrote from two point of views, but it's been a really long time. And this is what I was telling you, Kate, that I'm listening to the Alice Network and I absolutely am in love with it. I love the way you are telling these stories parallel, side by side, two very different voices. It is phenomenal. And so I'm studying you, Kate. I just want you to know that I'm studying you for this new novel I'm writing, but I'm writing it from two point of views from two different women who come from two different backgrounds, but they want the same thing. And it happens in the 1950s. I grew up in Philadelphia, and so I'm going back to Philadelphia. The story happens between Philadelphia and DC, and it's going to have some themes that I love, which is love, heartache, women who have to go through things that make them stronger. Like those are all the themes that I like to write about, and so that's kind of where I am with it.
You know, if you are looking at another, like, and thank you, I'm so glad you're enjoying the Alice Network. The one the writer I looked for when I was trying to figure out how to write a dual timeline was Beatrice Williams. She writes super voicey, very good dual timeline historical fiction. If you're looking for just kind of another author who does it really, an author who does it really well, she does it a hell of a lot better than me. But if you're looking for a good example of what to read.
Okay, I definitely.
That's a good one too. Anyway, we're coming at a 10-minute warning, so we do still have time for a few more questions, believe me, but go ahead and put them into the chat so that we can have a chance to get to them. This one is from BookMom42, and it says, Henry Louis Gates is a champion of Black literature being judged by its own culture and voice. Do you feel you were able to do that?
Do I feel like I'm able to judge other people's books? Is that the question? I'm sorry.
I'm not entirely sure. Do you feel like, I guess, does your book stand as being judged by its own culture and voice? I'm not.
I haven't received any feedback in that direction. I feel like everyone who has read the book, I mean, the reviews have been pretty awesome, to be honest. And I do read my own reviews. I probably should stop. No one's hurt my feelings yet. But the reviews have been very warm from people of all walks of life. So far, so good.
Oh, that's wonderful to hear. Now, what are you, just because it's a question I think that most, almost all writers know we're also reading. And I was that bookworm kid too, by the way, who's got like the huge stack under the arm. But what are you reading right now and recommending to people?
So there's a book coming out on Tuesday called The Kindest Lie by Nancy Johnson, which has been getting a lot of really good advanced praise. And so that is the book that I'm picking up next week. It comes out on the 2nd. I'm also reading a book by an author. Her name is Vanessa Riley. She has a book coming out called Island Queen. Now I got my first ask to blurb a book, Kate. So that's really exciting. So that's the book I'm reading now because the book comes out in July. So I've been asked to blurb it. So it's called Island Queen. So I'm reading.
I have that one too. I got asked to do that one too. So
oh my gosh, twins.
Yeah, I have that literally on my stack of ARCs. I have one more that it's due. I need to get a quote by the end of January, so that one's first. But hers is literally right next in line. I cannot wait to get to it.
I started it. I read a couple of chapters. It's really good so far. I think you're going to enjoy it. And prior to that, I put my toe a little bit in mystery books because I needed a break after the historical fiction, like just to focus on something completely different. So I just finished Attica Locke. I read her Highway 59 series, Bluebird, as well as Heaven, My Home, which they were both phenomenal. I love writers who I can learn something about craft from, and she's definitely one of those writers.
I got to meet Attica Locke and her sister Tempe Locke at a book event on the Queen Mary. This is like literally right before the world shut down. So this sticks out in my mind, but they were so incredibly wonderful. I was fangirling everywhere.
Authors are my heroes. Forget about the celebrities on TV. I fangirl over authors all the time.
All right, we've got another question here from Heather. How specifically was your manuscript refined in conjunction with your agent and editor? So this is sort of a how the sausage is made question.
Yeah, well, I have 2 agents, which I'm really very fortunate to have two agents. I went from the girl who nobody wanted to publish her book to having like two incredible agents. And one of them is really, she was an editor first. And so she and I spent a lot of time developmentally. So we go through the manuscript 2 or 3 times prior to it even going to an editor. So actually when it got to Simon and Schuster, my editor kept commenting saying, oh my gosh, this book is in such good shape. There's not much for me to do, but she still did another 10, 15% on it. And I think it takes all of that to make a book sing. You know, it takes what I do, it takes what my agent does, and it takes the gloss that the editor puts on it. I am one of those writers that I trust my team. And for the most part, when they make suggestions, I take them. Every now and again, I'll push back on something, but for the most part, I take their suggestions.
So as far as a team goes, like who's your team of people that you rely on? Because I really find that the best thing about this business that we're in is the posse that you end up with of fellow writers, and you know just how wonderfully supportive they are. I have not found that this industry is a shark tank full of backstabbers. So who's your posse? Who are the people that you rely on, to talk you off a ledge when you're there?
Yeah, well, I'm a member of the Tall Poppy Writers. So we are a co-op of women who write fiction, and there's about 30 of us. So we have a really tight network. We support each other, we promote each other, we keep each other. I think I met you, Kate, through one of my Tall Poppies. I think that's
because I also know Janie Chang through there.
Yes.
She's doing all the moderating this week, so I know quite a lot of you guys.
Yeah, so they definitely are awesome. I'm a Kimbilio Fellow, which is a group of African-American fiction authors where we have the option to go to New Mexico every year to kind of write together for a week. And that's how I know Nancy Johnson, who wrote The Kindest Lie, the book that I'm saying is coming out next week. And Nancy and I were actually in the same cohort. So I read her stuff, she read my stuff. She read portions of Yellow Wife, I read portions of The Kindest Lie, and we critiqued each other. So it's so amazing that Yellow Wife came out in January, The Kindest Lie is coming out in February, because we were in the same cohort 2 years ago. And there's also some Richmond writers here. I'm a part of the James River Writers. And so I keep in touch with a bunch of local Richmond writers, and we get together and that sort of thing. Well, when we could get together. But I do find that with this novel being historical fiction, I am online meeting a lot of new historical fiction writers who have been so super kind and almost like saying, Sadeqa, come on in, come over here. And it's been awesome. It's been awesome.
So we did have a question from Jason. What's the name of the co-op you're a member of? And is it for any authors interested in being a part of it, or is it or what's the selection?
So it's the Tall Poppy, Poppy, Tall Poppy Authors or Tall Poppy Writers. And actually, it is a closed co-op now. I'm not sure when we open it up to bring other authors in, but it's probably a year or two out, because we kind of try and figure out how to work within the co-op together, what our jobs are, how we can promote each other and help each other. And so we normally, right now, it's a closed co-op.
Oh, okay. So any last things you want to leave us with as far as Yellow Wife or the writing, or just a word out to readers and so forth?
Well, I just want to say that I'm super grateful to be here. When a book is just an idea in your head, there's a long journey from discovering the story to committing to writing the story, to actually writing the story, to going through all the drafts. And, sometimes your feelings get a little hurt because things are not working out the way you planned it. And so to actually be here with the book, and it's amazing. And I'm so grateful for all of you. I know that, on a Wednesday night, there's so many other things that you can be doing. And the fact that you're here with Kate and I tonight is just a blessing, and I appreciate it. Please support your local bookstores. They are having a hard time right now. So support. And Kate, I just want to say thank you. It means so much to me that someone at your level of writing would take the time to spend with me and be here with the library and ask me all these wonderful questions. So I just want to say that I'm grateful and thank you.
No, this is absolutely my pleasure. There are a few things that are more of a perk of my job than getting advanced looks at amazing new books that are coming out there and getting to see who else is, coming into the historical fiction world, what kind of stories are being told. So this was really my pleasure. So I would like to thank you for writing a fabulous book. I'm first in line for your next one. I want to go ahead and please thank you everyone for tuning in. Please go to the library if you are not budgeted for buying new books. So I think you should budget for this one. You're going to want to own it. So go to the library to get your copy, or go to your local bookstore to get your copy. We have plenty of links in the interview chat and so forth. So we really hope that you will be reading this book soon. You can also pre-order my next book, which is The Rose Code, which is out on March 9th, 6 weeks away. So if we want to just go ahead and sign off, I will give a wave.
Let's also just give our web addresses so people can find us, Kate. So if you want to find me, hopefully you can see my name behind me. It's Sadeqa Johnson. So my web address is sadeqajohnson.net. I absolutely love speaking to book clubs about my book. So go to my website. There's a form on the website that you can just put your information in and set up some time for me to come and talk about Yellow Wife with your book club. I would love it. I'm also on IG, Instagram at Sadeqa Says, which is easy to find me. And Kate, why don't you tell them how they can find you as well?
You can find me www.katequinnauthor.com. And I'm on Facebook quite a lot of the time when I'm procrastinating, which is also quite a lot of the time. I have an author page, just again, Kate Quinn Author. I'm on Twitter, Kate Quinn Author, and I'm on Instagram as Kate Quinn 5975. I don't know why I didn't do Kate Quinn Author there. I think because I was signing up in a real hurry and I just took the suggested name, but that's where I am on Insta. So please look me up. I talk to book clubs as well. It's virtual these days because of the pandemic, but it's still a good time.
Thank you. Thank you guys so much. We really appreciate it. It's been a joy and a pleasure.
All right. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you both.
Thank you. Feel free to unmute yourself and applaud and say thank you. That was wonderful.
Thank you. It was
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well,
Everyone, tell
you.
Kate that you want her to come back and do her book with us. Make sure
Yes.
we all like.
Oh, yeah. come
Yes,
back,
we
Kate.
will go.
Yep.
And Sequisha can ask the questions this time.
We'll flip roles. It'll be perfect. So,
That'll be fun. All right.
right.
Everybody, I'll talk to you.
thank you. Thank you for joining
you.
us. Bye-bye. Good night now.
bye.
Bye-bye.